Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to get started in just a minute. But in the meantime, we invite you all to just drop a note in the chat saying where you're from. Amazing. I am seeing a ton of people coming in. I see a lot from New York. I'm also in New York. Great to see you. Then on the other side of the country, I'm seeing a lot of California, Washington, Georgia, Texas, Alabama, Ohio, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Woo! This is awesome.
I don't speak to them for that.
And don't forget North Dakota.
And Korea. Amazing. Oh, Yugoslavia, Egypt, Virginia, Hawaii. Well, we are so happy to have you all here. Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started, but please feel free to keep dropping where you're from in the chat. We are so excited to see you. Welcome, everyone, to our second week of the Drawing and Cartooning Workshop Series, sponsored by the Herb Block Foundation. Tonight, we are joined by Peter Kuper, who I'm excited to introduce in just a moment. And thanks to all of you who joined us last week for our first workshop with Liza Donnelly. We had a tremendous session going over an introduction to cartooning formats. And we also have the recording from that session so that if you couldn't join us, you can still catch up. I will share that link in the chat before we part ways today. But we are so happy to have you here. I would invite you all throughout the session to go ahead and drop your questions in the Q&A box and to upvote questions that you want to ask so that we can get multiple questions. Excuse me, so that I can see what is the most popular. So for example, if you see a question that you want to ask and someone's already asked it, rather than typing it in again, just upvote that question so that I can tell that it's popular, and I'm going to ask those to Peter first. And we will do that later. The chat is on right now, but we'll turn it off while Peter is presenting. And you'll just be able to chat Peter and I at that point. Just a couple of reminders about what to expect during the series. So today is again our second session. We are focusing on illustration techniques. Next week, we will be joined by Lalo Alcaraz for our session on expressing your perspective. And we invite you all back again on September 6th for our revision session, where Peter, Liza, and Lalo will all be on again, along with other Scholastic Awards jurors and artists who will be joining us to provide feedback on your work. So you are all invited to attend that session, and you'll be able to go into small breakout rooms and actually share your work with one of the incredible artists joining us. The Zoom link to sign up for that session will be emailed out after our August 16th session, so keep an eye out for that. I see that some folks are having a hard time hearing me. Let's see, Peter, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. How about some folks in the chat? Can you confirm that you can hear me? Okay, thank you. All right, so moving right along, just a reminder, if you are ages 13 and up and in grades 7 through 12, you are eligible to participate in the Scholastic Art Writing Awards. You can submit multiple pieces of art and writing, and something that you are inspired to make from this series may be eligible for a $1,000 scholarship sponsored by the Herb Block Award. We'll go over a little bit more information about that in our September 6th session. And with that, I would like to hand it off to Peter. Peter is an incredible artist who has worked with the New Yorker, The Nation, Charlie Hebdo in France, Mad Magazine. He is the co-founder of a forum open to political artists. He is a professor of cartooning at Harvard and also a lecturer who lectures at universities around the world. And he is a graphic novelist. He also has an exhibition currently up at the New York Public Library for those of you in the area. called Intersects. And we invite you all to visit that exhibition. It is open until this Saturday, August 13th. So get down there this week if you are able to. And with that, Peter, I hand it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. And here we go with my screen share. And here we go with slideshow. And I trust everybody can see this. All good? Katie, yes? Okay, thank you.
Good, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to start at the very beginning. I'm going to go back a little bit evolutionarily. And sound is all good?
Yes, good sound.
Okay. We are creatures that crawled out of the sea. And for some reason, we're always fighting. I can't explain that part, but that's just, human condition. But I do want to go back to the sort of original art. The thing that's interesting about drawing in particular is that there's no evidence of the music that we played back then. I mean, you can't hear the sound at least. And there's this tendency we've had to try to leave some kind of mark of our passage and to tell stories. This is how we know what our shopping habits were. We would never have known that. That actually is Banksy, who put this up at the British Museum, where it lasted for 2 weeks before somebody noticed that there was a shopping cart in it. So fantastic, Banksy. If you don't know his work, look it up. It's great. So our first language is actually like pictograms. So, the letter forms came from images first. So I think it's really in our DNA to understand graphics. And this is the codexes from Mexico. Thankfully, there was a friar who didn't burn every one of them. And they're very much like comics. You can read them. They're in book form. They have recurring characters, and this form has been around for quite a while. You may have been reading these comics, depending on your religion. Storytelling, panel to panel, recurring characters, strikes me as being comics. This is actually the definition of comics. This was a rug, a tapestry that I saw at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. It's the history of the world, creation of the world. This is from the 1200s, panel to panel, and recurring characters, Jesus, God, other people, and these are comics as far as I'm concerned. Murals are also very much part of this. This is Diego Rivera in Mexico. And this is, not only he's telling the story of Mexico in these murals that are in the palace in Mexico City, but if you look at the bottom panels, it's like day-to-day life in black and white, whereas you have the bigger picture in color. There's recurring characters. You see the guy that's up here shows up again over here. There's Cortez, conquistador, coming to Mexico over here again, here, and all the horrific things that occurred during the conquest. And, it's telling that story in one image, but it is in fact a sequential story. This is Goya, 1800s. Artists have had a tendency to want to tell stories and also tell the political situation. And Goya was like a court painter, and he painted a lot of images of the king, but he also painted what was going on around him in the world. This is Daumier in France. This is also 1800s, and he did he drew the king many different ways. That's King Philippe. Louis Philippe, and he, sorry if I flipped that name, might be Philippe, yeah, it's Louis Philippe. Anyway, he got Daumier, the artist, got put in jail for 6 months for this drawing. So artists have sometimes put their neck on the line in order to do the kind of work that they do. On the super great side, this is Thomas Nast, an American, 1871. He was drawing this character here in the middle, is Boss Tweed. And if you ever saw the movie The Gangs of New York, Boss Tweed makes an appearance in there. He was a political figure in an Irishman in New York City. And he was helping his constituency quite a bit. He was helping out people, but he also was robbing the treasury to the tune of, I think it was $24 million, which you can only imagine what that is in modern money. And the drawings that Thomas Nast did actually literally got him where he had to flee the United States. And when he got to Portugal, they recognized him from the drawings by this cartoonist, Thomas Nast. He got arrested and he died penniless in jail. Yay for cartooning. So there were magazines that were publishing this work. One of them was The Masses. This got shut down in World War I. Pardon me if I'm giving you more information than you need, but I just love this topic. And they had cartoonists in here. There's The Perfect Soldier from World War I. The magazine got shut down by Woodrow Wilson, the president of the time, because anything against war was considered to be an act of sedition. In Germany, there was Simplicissimus that also got shut down, and that gave a forum to the artists like Kathy Kollwitz, who were talking about what was going on politically and talking about, say, the rise of Hitler before he became chancellor. And many of them had to flee the country. They would have been killed when Hitler came to power. This is Guernica by Picasso. So fine artists, it kind of blurred across the lines of illustration, fine art, cartooning, where artists were talking about this, in this case, the bombing of the town of Guernica in Spain by Franco, who was the fascist dictator there. So to my point, we've tried to leave this little mark on a wall, a little, little scratch, a little something in that lets people know our history, our language, done with pictures. And, graffiti goes way back. That this is like the language of people who they want to be heard, and that you may not have a gallery or a museum to show your work. And so sometimes it's the street. This is Banksy, who's still not absolutely known who he is. He's a guerrilla artist putting stuff up at night. And these beautiful, brilliant editorial comments that show up on the street and have become worth millions. This is JR, an artist who uses photography. This is the favela, which is the extremely poor neighborhood in Rio, Brazil. And it was like the neighborhood looking back at you. He did this on the border wall in between Mexico and Texas, giant blow up. Brilliant way to convey an idea that's both in one way, it comments on what's going on. There's a quality of threat here, but there's also a quality of love and compassion. So I grew up in the 70s, and this was the kind of image that was around. I would love to have been able to draw happier images, but the Vietnam War was going on, or maybe you don't know. There was a war going on when I was growing up, and people were getting drafted and killed. And so I was in that environment, and this was on the nightly news. So I found myself drawing this. When I went to art school, the president coming in was a guy named Ronald Reagan. And I was doing comics, and my friend was doing comics. And we were in Brooklyn at Pratt Institute Art School. And we were having trouble getting our work published. We wanted to talk about what was going on, the threat of nuclear war. And this new potential president who was running for election was clearly headed towards like his itchy finger on the button. And so we couldn't get our work published very easily. So we decided we would self-publish it. And year after year, we self-published this magazine. We put our own money in. The secret to our longevity, to our success, has been that no one ever got paid. We're working on a new issue now. We're in our 42nd year of publication. It continues to be that no one's been paid. Everybody that works on it for free. As an editor, I just get hated more for the work that I don't publish. But it was we wanted to create a forum for a lot of different artists to have a voice and get out there. And sometimes if you can't find a place to get it done, you do it on a wall, or you self-publish a magazine. Another important influence for me was Mad Magazine. I grew up reading this. It was the first place where I saw humor and politics collide. And they seemed to make fun of everything. And there was a particular comic in there that I loved, Spy versus Spy. I don't know if any of you have seen this. But so I grew up reading this, and it looked like this when I was reading it. It was started by a Cuban artist in 1961, and it was about the Cold War, the fight between Russia and the United States, which was in the early 60s. The threat of a nuclear war was very real, and people were really scared about this. That threat hasn't exactly gone away, but it not at the level that it was at that time. And he created these two spies that are constantly killing themselves. Well, in a weird twist of fate, I was asked if I wanted to take it over in 1996 when the original artist had retired. And if I had really wanted the job, I probably would have drawn it like this. This is actually by me, drawing in the style of the original artist, whose name is Antonio Prohias, Cuban artist, as I've mentioned. But I really didn't want the job. I was doing my own thing, and I thought, like, well, okay. And they said, we'll pay you to try out for it. And so I did, but I was like, I'm going to just do like what I'm doing now, which is stencils and spray paint. So this is what I turned in as my sample, and they were like, perfect. In fact, had I tried to get the job, I'm sure I wouldn't have gotten it, because I would have done it like that. And they would have gone, well, we've had that. How about something new? And I got that in 1996. I am working on my latest comic now, 27 years later. I thought I was going to do it for like a year. So this is a little bit of the process. On a napkin, I do a little sketch when I get an idea. Tighten it up for a pencil, think about it some more, tighten up even more, and then submit this to the editors. They hopefully say yes. I fixed it even more. This is a particularly long, windy process for this one. Then I did a really tight sketch that I figured out everything and figured out where things were going to land and how you would read it and all. One of the cool things about Spy versus Spy is there's no words. And this is, going back to cave painting, no words in the cave painting. I love the idea that I can do something that pretty much anybody in any language can understand, aside from spraying, smash, and boom. So I mentioned I do stencils. I cut a stencil. That is, I photocopied my art, and then on this photocopy with an X-Acto knife, I cut out the holes of where I wanted the green to go. And then I cut out holes where I wanted red and black to go. And when I sprayed it with hideous spray paint, it looked like this. It's missing some of the lines. I started putting in ink lines there. Then I added them, the rest of that. Then I went in with watercolor, and then I added even more watercolor and pen and inked some of the details. And that's how I get to that phase. And there's another example of one of the ones. And so this is stencil, spray paint, watercolor. So, this is it. I'm supposed to talk about technique. So I'm talking about technique. And, but I just love trying to tell a story without words and how much one can tell without using words. So each one of them, the spies are killing each other and they come back each time. I started adding another panel where so that one would win in one story and one would win in the other, so it's fair. Well, they then eventually said, hey, if you want to, change up the style. And I was like, yeah, I'm getting bored with stencils and spray paint. Also, spray paint is really toxic. I don't recommend it to anybody. So here I am making kind of fun and taking old comics like the original Spider-Man and an old Batman and et cetera, and first appearance of Superman. And I'm drawing this one in pen and ink, and it's digitally colored. And this is kind of a happy medium between stencil, spray paint, pen and ink, and digital. And that was a cover last year. So you wonder where ideas come from. Well, you take somebody like Leonardo da Vinci, he probably was looking out the window at a bird and he thought, wow, how do those wings work? Well, I'll just mess with that. And then he developed these ideas for, flying machines and, things that actually couldn't even function at the time because they were so revolutionary. But the Wright brothers, the first people in, I think it was 1912, developed the first airplane and taking Leonardo's ideas. And then that eventually became the spirit of St. Louis, which Charles Lindbergh, first guy to cross the Atlantic, flew, amazing, in 1927. And then that led to, well, they developed much, higher powered things like the Enola Gay and jets that could, well, drop bombs. And that's the funny thing about ideas is sometimes they can kind of get away from you and become, you don't know where they're going to go. And sometimes, you want to just stick with the painting. So who knows, maybe Leonardo figured out E equals mc squared and he thought better of it. So really important, I recommend this to everybody, is sketchbooks. I have these little tiny sketchbook things that I keep around that are like, here's the one I have here, if you can see me. That's what you're looking at there. I keep a back pocket sketchbook because I get ideas on the subway. I get ideas when I'm walking down the street. I may wake up in the middle of the night with an idea and I don't want to miss it. And I keep a regular sketchbook. And I just, sketchbooks are a place where you play around. You don't worry about style. You just do whatever you want to do. You don't worry about who's going to look at it. Admittedly, I've kind of perfected the sketchbook. So I draw and draw and draw and draw, and I can show it to somebody, but that's not the point. That's my sketchbook turned sideways. And that's with watercolor and colored pencil, a little collage, pen and ink. I was in Chinatown in New York City and I did that. That turned into a whole book of my work from New York that included comics and things like that. So I do find ways to publish these things and sometimes actually get paid for them. But that's not the point. The point is that you want to just draw, and you need to draw. It's like exercising, that if you don't exercise, your muscles get weak. If you draw a lot, they get better. This is one of my sort of developing pages from a sketchbook I did when I lived in Mexico with my wife and daughter for 2 years in Oaxaca in southern Mexico. And you see sort of a developing page. I'm doing pen and ink, and then I started adding some color, and I add more color, and there's a little collage in there. I use a little glue stick, which I can put things in. And there's just, I try to just keep them open and play around, so it's not just one thing. And again, really important to not worry about people looking at it. Really important to work in a book where you'll draw in it, small enough to draw in, big enough to get your ideas down, but not something that keeps you from drawing because you're like, oh, I have to do a perfect drawing and sign my name to it. Now, again, I've been sketchbooking since I was a teenager, and all your age, and that has turned out great because these sketches have turned into work that I've ended up getting published. This was during our time in Oaxaca. Oaxaca spelled weirdly, Oaxaca. And there was a strike going on, and I started drawing about it, and then people were interested in seeing what I had to say about it, and I did it in sketches, and then that ended up getting published in various magazines. I was downtown during one of the strikes. It's a teacher's strike that happened there. And just after I left, and after I did half this drawing, the police attacked. It was federal troops, in fact. And they arrested about 150 people, and I missed being caught in that by a hair. And I did the story for World War III, the magazine I co-edit and co-publish. But it also got picked up in newspapers and things like that, and in a weird, twist of things. And this all turned into a giant book that I did that I keep updating every time I go back to Oaxaca. That is my sketchbook from 2 years plus. And that has gotten me traveling around the world to go to book festivals and things like that. So that was the result of sketchbooking, which, that came out of years and years and years of doing it. But that's, you never know where it's going to go. Somebody saw my sketchbook at a magazine called Details, which is no longer around. And they sent me to a thing called Burning Man, which is out in the Nevada desert, where people take their clothes off and create art and do all sorts of wild things. There's a whole fashion show. People drive these cool cars around. It's out in the playa of Nevada. And I was sent out there to do a comic about it, and got paid to do that. Crazy thing that came out of sketchbooking. At the end of the whole festival, after 5 days of camping out, they burn this giant figure, and it's just cool and very loving and wonderful. And when I went there, it started with 20 people, then expanded to 200. When I went, it was 11,000. I think by now it's probably, I don't know, I'd have to check, 50,000, 100,000 people go there for this festival. So now I'm going to give you the inside secrets of a graphic novelist. And so now you will know what happens. So the most important thing in general in getting into the arts, and this is, a guiding force for me, is my desire not to have a 9-to-5 job. So that's how I feel. So there you go. Now you know. So one of the books that I did was called The System. This is a wordless book I did for DC Comics for Vertigo. So I'm interested in graphic novels. The whole book was wordless, but in order to get paid as a writer, I had to write up a script. So I did. That's what it looks like. So when I map out a book, I map it out on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper like this with little squares, and slowly figure out what's going to happen on each page. And then I do these little booklets, and little booklets, which I'll show you more when I have a bigger screen, look like this. They're really tiny. And I draw these little things. That's the same size as the printed page. That's a pencil drawing. Then I photocopied it and enlarged it. And I cut a stencil because I was doing my stencil spray paint thing. And like I said, I used spray cans. It's like I used Krylon. Do not recommend this. Please don't rush out and get spray paint. You can do it with a toothbrush and some watercolor and save your health. So that's what it looks like when I sprayed it with first red paint, then without moving the stencil, black paint. And then I've gone in with watercolor and colored pencil. I sprayed it on watercolor paper. There's another spread from the book. I sprayed it with blue and red and a little bit of black. And then I went in with watercolor and it came out like that. Another thing I've done with comics, and I'm really interested in exploring all aspects of comics. So I really like doing autobiographical things. I like doing fiction. I also like adapting other people's work. In this case, the writer Franz Kafka, who in 1915 wrote this book, The Metamorphosis. And before I started that, The Simpsons comic asked me if I would do a Treehouse of Horror. And I thought it'd be cool if I put Homer in the situation of the Kafka metamorphosis, where a guy wakes up one morning and he's turned into a bug. So it's Metamorphosis Simpsons. So I try to familiarize myself with the characters. And so I'm drawing it and moving it around. I get reference. You can do this with Google like you can't believe. Back then, I probably could have Googled, but I'm old school. So I went to the library picture collection and I got these images out. I still look for things. I did the same thing I showed you that I did with the system. I break it down page to page because I need to figure out what's going to happen. And even in this small size, I can figure out a lot of things. That's the little booklet size. So I do this little, like I said, I'll show this to you again when I'm done. The booklet is this big, it's teeny weeny. And I draw on that so I can like actually read it like a book. Then I do it on a single page. And in this case, again, back to style technique, I decided I wanted it to look like the period that it was written in 1915, like German Expressionism. I really recommend you all go to museums as much as possible. Look at art history. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of inspiration out there. So I worked on this kind of paper called Scratchboard, which they don't really make anymore much. But it was a chalk covered paper that I could put ink on and then scratch to make it look like it was a woodcut. So that's my final thing. So you'll notice I did a giant stylistic shift here because I want my work to reflect the subject matter. I'm not interested in the style, like I have a style and that's my one style. I'm interested in what style will serve the story. I'm also somebody who gets bored easily. And if I draw in one style too long, it seems like, it's like fashion. You know, if you wear the same clothes too long, they start to smell. And for me, that's what happens with style. So more recently, I did a collection of short stories by Kafka. And this one I actually did in pen and ink with a little whiteout. So I kind of approximated the quality you get from Scratchboard because I've run out of Scratchboard and they don't make it, sadly. This is another one like that. And I'm playing around with the title. It's the title of this one, Before the Law. So you can see the title in there. I really like playing with comics a lot. I also took these Kafka stories written around, like early 1900s, and I made them stories that I was interested in. So this one is sort of about civil rights, even though I don't think Kafka was thinking about that. In the Penal Colony was an old story that was, just about, anyway, I won't even go to what it's about, but I just, crafted it to be sort of what I thought the story read to me, because the beauty of this particular writer is that you can interpret his stories many ways. So another cool thing that happens with comics is sometimes publishers in other countries pick them up. I forget what I think that's French. And then this was in Slovenia. I was invited to have a show, an exhibition there last year. And there is, this is another, like, I'm moving through different worlds as part of having a career, but also part of my interest in how this work can function in different ways. So there's an exhibition in Slovenia, the former Yugoslavia, where they took my comics. I did different prints and they had original art, and they did these cutouts themselves to make this really cool design and put the stuff on the wall. I love it. Very, very nice. Another adaptation I did recently, my last book, was a 1899 book called Heart of Darkness that was made more recently, relatively recently, into a movie called Apocalypse Now, where they moved it to Vietnam. Same deal. I use this method for doing books a lot, where I do these this like 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. I've figured a lot of details out. There's a little zoomed in so you can see, if you look at the circled page, now you're seeing it in my little booklet, 1/3 size of the finished book. There's my pencil drawing at print size. I do it like that so that I don't put more details in than I really, need for, for the reader. Like I could just fill this up if I work too large, but then I do enlarge it in order to do the finished art. This is on watercolor paper. That's black pencil with some watercolor. And then I go in with the magic of digital. That's my hand lettering turned into a font, which you can do on, there's websites that will turn your lettering into a font. And this way I can edit, which I need to do because I did this for a publisher and sometimes they have suggestions, or sometimes I just want to move the type around. And if I lettered it and then had to move it, it would be a big fat drag. And there's the finished book, the way it looks in print. A book that I'm particularly fond of. This is the Spanish edition, published in Mexico, Ruins. I took my time in Mexico and I turned it into a story, a fictional account of a couple moving to Mexico. But also, I'm really interested in insects. My daughter and I raised monarch butterflies while we were in Mexico. And then we went to Michoacan, where they have millions of monarchs, and we got to visit that. And I turned that into this book. There's my little booklet version. There's my pencil drawing. There's pen and ink, a little larger than the finished piece. And then I go in with digital art, boom. And so that's digital coloring over that pen and ink. So the story is the tandem, same time, monarch butterfly making its way to Mexico from Canada, which is what they do, they migrate. And also this story of this couple moving to Mexico. So it's a double story. There they are on their way to Mexico. So this is done with pen and ink and then digital. But then when I got to Mexico, I thought, well, I want to make it feel like you've arrived in Mexico. So what did I do? I changed the style to be more like my sketchbook. So this is pen and ink, watercolor, colored pencil. And so it's a different style when they're in Mexico, and also a different style when I in this case, I'm having them visualize the past. So I use color to do that. So there's just different ways to apply technique and style to make that work. And this is much more like my sketchbook things. As I said, there was a teacher's strike. We were in the middle of this. I put my characters right in the middle, even more in the middle than we were. They got caught in the middle. When my wife and I left that strike and didn't get arrested, this couple was right in the middle and they got tear gas. So this is the beauty of fiction. You can do that kind of thing. So in the broad scope of things, this is something I did when I was in art school, actually, but I got it published a little later. So comics, interestingly enough, when I started, the reason why we had to self-publish World War III was because it was nearly impossible to get work. Nobody's interested in comics. Nobody thought comics were for anything but kids. I was doing political comics. And so I wanted to make a living in art. And I found I could make a living as an illustrator, doing one individual image that paid more than entire comic books I did. Or, well, anything above zero was more than I was getting paid for things like World War III. So this is from the New York Times. That's an illustration using stencil, spray paint, collage. There used to be a lot of alternative papers. Each city had one. A lot of this has changed. I'm very much less an illustrator these days because of the change in what exists. But I found myself more and more, and to be fair, by the way, I did a lot of illustration that was not very exciting about computers, and I was just excited to get work at all. But at a certain point, I found I had to talk about what was going on, and what was going on was things like climate change, which I was very concerned about many decades ago. And this is the kind of images I was doing. You know, that's probably a 20-year-old illustration I did. So funny how these things keep coming around. So I did a lot of single illustrations. Poor Tarzan there trying to find a tree to swing from. Interestingly, what I found was if I was selling myself as a style, then, well, they could hire a lot of people. But if I sold myself as a person with ideas, then I tended to get called for my ideas. Crazy arrangement with something like Time Magazine is that they'd call me at noon. They wanted to see a sketch by 2. They'd put it into the design. And by about 7 o'clock, I had to deliver a finished piece of art that would then show up on Monday. So it was admittedly high stress work, but it was something that I discovered I was fit with my sensibilities, particularly when it was about subjects that mattered to me. And in fact, it takes me all day to come up with an idea for something that I don't find interesting. And it takes me a very short period of time to come up with things that I feel I relate to, like job panic, which I had experienced many times in a number of career crashes over the years. But I've had the good fortune of being able to essentially continue on this path and avoid taking that restaurant job. But I did my restaurant work when I was in high school, so I put in my time. So these are all examples of illustrations, kind of a combo of collage and stencil, spray paint, and returning ever to subject matter that interests me. But it's not always, it doesn't always have to be dark and political, or maybe it does. That's one of the old presidents as Richard Nixon as the Cheshire Cat. So when I had trouble getting work in the United States, I found a publisher in Mexico who offered me work illustrating Alice in Wonderland. So these are my illustrations there, very different style. So you can see technically I move all over the place. I read the material. This is what seemed like it was called for. I had a ball drawing it, cast my daughter as Alice, and it was just really fun to go in this direction. So another thing that I recommend to everybody is finding those things that you're passionate about. This is really, really important. What will make it possible to keep working when you get tired or get inspired is finding things that you're passionate about. If you're interested in sports, draw about sports. If you're interested in horses, do that. Me, super interested in insects from when I was a child. There I am holding a Cecropia moth in 1968. There's me holding a drawing that I made of a Cecropia moth last year. Through this interest, I've got a job doing a weekly strip for a French magazine called Charlie Hebdo. It's a 4-panel wordless comic. This whole wordless thing is going back to cave painting has proved very useful. Each one of those is an individual read down comic. This is something I did for the New Yorker last year when the cicadas came out, which do every 17 years somewhere. This is another piece I did for the New York Times, using comics, my passion for insects and all that, cover for a magazine. I ended up getting a fellowship at the New York Public Library. And as Katie mentioned, I have an exhibition there, and this is a little taste of it. So there they are putting it up. These are my comics now blown up, gigantic, full size, human size, little things that you can stick up on the wall. And there's this giant exhibition there now. Those are my Charlie Hebdo comics and the art on the right that now turned into an art thing, so I can kind of move between worlds. I put type on the walls. I did all these cool things. This is like really, I really love the way comics and storytelling can jump from paper to wall to, around. I'm in there just for scale, so I get a sense of. And there's the butterfly drawings I did in my book Ruins turned into this one here. I even put insects on the ceiling. Some of them are hanging down. And if you're in New York and you go see it, you have until Saturday. So choosing an art style, I'm very interested in exploring art history. This is George Seurat, who developed the pointillist idea, or was one of the people who did it. And that came really in handy when I wanted to make a comment about coronavirus. That's digitally playing with his painting. One of my earliest jobs was as an inker on Richie Rich. I don't know if you know the comic, you might know the movie. I inked the lines on this. That came in handy when I wanted to talk about President George W. Bush going into the Iraq. There were a couple of things with sound, yay. So I really like playing with using other artists' work and then twisting it a little bit. So in this case, Dr. Seuss turned to Dr. Fauci, a little Disney there. Look, we'll whistle when it's $15 an hour. The whistle while you work song. This is an old horror comic that I turned into something commenting about the Senate. This is a 1905 comic by a guy named Winsor McCay, who was a big influence on me. And he did these cool comics. This kid sneezes and blows the panels away. So I thought, why not have a modernized version of it? So another person blowing the panels away. Mentioned Alice in Wonderland and Tenniel. Why not take that and turn it into a curiouser commentary on? I did this before number 45 was elected. Here's another version of that where I looked at this old Dennis the Menace comic and thought, hey, I could play with that and make it a different kind of menace. Or Dick Tracy, little tweaking, boom, there you go. So characters from, referencing the style. So like I said, I draw in a style that works for me. This is a 1970s hippie comic that was very popular. It was made into a poster. And I just thought about this recently again. I was like, oh yeah, this Robert Crumb was a big influence on my work. And I thought, why not talk about climate change using that comic? So cribbing the R. Crumb style. Apologies, Robert. So in the various turns of events, my illustration career pretty much crashed along with the 2008 crash with magazines disappearing. And I found myself turning towards single cartoons, editorial and gag cartoons. And this is which variant of the hoax do you think we contracted? So, I get to put my political beliefs in here. These are syndicated to a bunch of different newspapers. I also pitch them on a regular basis to the New Yorker and other places. This is part of the process. So with the New Yorker, they have a morning pitch where it's for their website. And so I wake up in the morning and I read the news. In this case, it was about the shooting at a school and how upsetting that was. And that the recommendation that what teachers need to do is get guns and we need to lock up schools, which is the stupidest thing I could conjure up. So I turned it into this castle. So I did a sketch, which I then sent to the New Yorker. I had to do this by 9 a.m. And then I wait to hear from them. And if they like what I did, then I have from 9 until, or they tell you by about 9:30 or 10, and you have until noon to do a finished piece of art. So that's my pencil drawing with some color, then digitally colored. And then I add a little bit of overlay of old paper to make the digital less digital and more warm. So yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Thank you for walking us through that. On the topic of political cartoons, we actually have some questions in the Q&A related to that.
Absolutely.
If you don't mind me sharing those.
Please.
One of the questions is, do you think an artist who makes more political artwork will get more recognition than others?
Absolutely not. I mean, and it depends on the recognition you mean. I did mention that early French cartoonist Daumier. He got the recognition of a 6-month jail term. Thomas Nast obviously did better than that. Depending on the political wins, certainly artists in different countries will get arrested for what they do. So if you consider that to be getting attention, you can get attention that way. It depends on the work you're doing. A number of political artists do extremely well, and maybe they do get more attention. Certainly, maybe on posting on the web. There's a mountain of work that I've done that's never been. It's only been posted. I've never been paid for it. I mean, literally hundreds, maybe thousands of cartoons that I do that nobody's particularly interested in. So it's that's one of those things. I would roll this back to what I said about I did comics maybe for a decade, maybe even more, where I was almost not paid at all. But comics have been a passion of mine. So I was doing something I really loved. And so when comics became something that people were interested in, when comics became something that people were interested in, I was standing at the door. And because it was something I love, well, then boom, I got, oh yeah, you could do Metamorphosis for Random House and get paid quite well for it. And that you can do this graphic novel or that graphic novel. But it was decades of doing the work for almost free and literally self-publishing. but I was doing something that I love. So if you're really interested in politics, then do it. Don't ever do anything that you think somebody else is going to like, thinking that's where you'll hit the jackpot or where you'll get more attention. You really are only promised an audience of one. So you better like what you do. If you love what you do, you got one love fan in there, guaranteed. If you do it thinking somebody else is going to like it and they don't, you could come out with zero. So I constantly promote the idea, figure out your passion, which is not an easy thing. I'm extremely lucky because I have multiple passions. I have all these passions in art, as you've seen, but I also am really interested in insects. So right now I'm working on a graphic novel all about the history of insects. So I get to merge all of these interests and then draw comics about insects. And that's like, the dream scenario. But like I said, if you were interested in horses or you like football, I'm not interested in sports. I like horses, but that's not my area. But if you can find the Venn diagram, that is the, things that meet where between the two, you like to draw and you like sports, drawing sports, you're going to come out with a passionate something that will be interesting to people because, people respond to artists that have heart and love in what they're doing. And if they don't, so be it. You may not make a living from it, but you'll be doing something that you love. And very few people get to, necessarily say that. So, and I would recommend everybody, if you all draw and it doesn't turn into your job, and even if it does turn into your job, there's a degree of work and drudgery and boredom and I'm looking at a deadline and I'm like, oh no, I have to do that, including with all the things I love. But if you don't make a living at it, if it doesn't work out that way, that doesn't mean you should stop drawing. If you get any pleasure out of it at all, you should get that pleasure out of it and keep doing it. So many people, so many adults who drew when they were kids, put it on the shelf and go, oh, well, I used to do that, but I don't do it anymore. Why? If you like doing it, why stop? It's like I'm taking up the ukulele now. I'm a terrible player, but I get really pleasure out of plunking away every day. And I'm driving my wife crazy playing the same song again and again. But if you find something that is like meditative, that you enjoy, even with the struggle that you get, because it's not, it's like I said, it's like exercising. If you don't do it at all, then when you do it, it's like, oh, this is so hard to lift this weight. But if you do it all the time, then you start wishing you were doing it more and making time for it. And there is no excuse for not drawing, for not like, oh, I don't have the time to do it. I watch a TV show and I draw who's on the screen. I watch a movie and do that. I draw when I'm on the subway. There's never, boredom time when you might be looking at your phone. You might just say, I'm going to take that time and I'm going to draw in my little pocket sketchbook or the one I carry with me. But if you don't do that, for sure, nothing happens. The one thing, like working for the New Yorker, which is really like banging your head against the wall, as Liza knows well, it's like it feels so good because when you stop. But one guarantee is if I don't pitch them something, then nothing will happen. So even though I can pitch for 6 months, 5 days a week and never sell anything to them, if I don't do that, I am guaranteed I will never get in the New Yorker. But I, keep doing it. And even though I go through the same experience of thinking like, why am I doing this? It's so stupid. I do it, I get excited, and they don't even respond. And then I get up the next morning and I do it again. But you know what? I dig cartooning. So if I don't do that, so I'll post it. So what? So again, back to you got to do something that you love. More questions?
So actually, also related to art careers, we have a ton of questions. So I'm going to start summarizing some of them together. We had a lot of folks who are thinking about going to art school. Do you have any advice for young artists who are considering whether or not to go to art school?
Going into art is, it is obviously, not a simple task. I think if you love doing it, studying it is worthwhile. It's also really great to study a lot of things because you bring more to the table than if you're just looking at one thing, whatever that may be. You know, if you just focus on one thing, you're narrowing your path. So, you know, if you're going to get into art, you know, think about writing, think about biology, think about, you know, I'm now on a path here at a much older stage in my life where I'm studying insects, and then that leads to evolution, and that leads to the history of flowers because they pollinate flowers, and it's like this going down a rabbit hole of different areas that are not my area. I'm not, I sort of like, I pre-quit on getting into the sciences because I just thought it was too much for me. And I didn't have any sensibility in that, but coming in through sort of the back door, I'm now getting more and more interested in it and watching documentaries on these things and learning about it. And I'm like, yeah, I have to learn about architecture because I want to draw buildings. So, here's a picture with a lot of buildings in it. It's important to, you want to be expanded. So think about the other things, within art, there's animation, there's digital things, there's website design, there's graphic design, there's all these areas that you can go into within the discipline. But I can't say anything more. I teach at Harvard, but also I've taught for 30 years at the School of Visual Arts. I don't currently, but it's I think that it enriches your life to learn about art. But it's like an ongoing thing, and a lot of it you can do on your own. I mean, you can go to museums, and you can, a lot of things are free. And if you're a student, you have student ID, you can get into a lot of these places. But if you don't seem to be if you're not really interested in learning about them, art, then and the history, maybe it's not for you. One thing I have seen consistently is the people that are successful are interested in the history of their form or art in general. And so, I showed you a bunch of early art. That's just examples of things. I'm interested in the whole thing. I'm interested in fine art and in editorial. And a lot of people are not. I mean, a lot of people in fine arts know nothing about comics. I think they're idiots, but that's just me. That the idea that you'd be in art and then shut yourself off from other arts because, well, that's not fine art, or that's, whatever. I think that's idiotic, but that it served me very well to be interested in all those forms because they do crisscross.
Thank you so much, Peter. And I'm sorry, I know we only have one more minute left,
okay.
But if you could answer one last question.
Okay.
We have a lot of people asking about what happens when you are blocked, like if you can't draw all of a sudden. If that ever happens to you, where do you get your inspiration from? How do you avoid burnout?
Right. Well, I will draw from a photograph. I will draw. I really, really recommend to everybody. My first assignment at Harvard for students is to copy another person's art, copy a comic, copy a drawing. You never, ever have to not be inspired. I do not look at a blank piece of paper and hope I'll get an idea. I look at art to get ideas about doing art. As you can see, I've copied other artists left and right. But you can pick up a photograph, you take a picture outside, try to draw it, get frustrated, of course, because that's what happens. But I just threw my daughter in here, by the way. There she is at 9, and there she is more today. Just because one of the beauties of art is you don't have to draw things the way they are always. You can draw things the way you'd like them to be. And though they say the revolution may not be televised, I believe it will be illustrated. And I tried, I'm trying to bring myself back to the smiley face of drawing art that's beautiful also. There's a lot of ranges in here and a lot of things you can do. And right now, especially, I feel like art really, really matters. We desperately need artists to tell us about the world, to describe the beautiful world we live in, and try to give hope. And while you're at doing this, and even if you're drawing political art where you're angry about what's going on, be kind, and that there's ways to do this. And even with strong political art, as you've seen, I've done a lot of attack art on various politicians that I try to also think about ways to communicate in ways that are positive. But what say that the question one more time, because there was something I wanted to add to that.
What do you do if you are experiencing artist block?
Right. So even if I am not, and I'm going to quote Patti Smith here, musician, even if I'm blocked and I don't have an idea, I'm curious. And there's so many things that you can look at. Go to a museum. If you're feeling blocked, go to a museum. Go to, a lot of these are free. My show, by the way, at the library in New York, free. But just pick up a book, look online, look at other artists, find other artists that will inspire you. That's, critical, because, a lot of times you may be like, what direction am I going in? But ultimately, like, there's an artist that is like a guiding light to you. And, I try to be that I am guided by a million lights from the artists that came before me, or even ones that are doing work now. And I recommend look around a lot. And, there's never, ever a good reason to not be inspired, because we live in an inspiring world. And if you're drawing a blank, trace a photograph, copy somebody else's work.
Thank you so much, Peter, for a phenomenal session. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. I'm sorry that we could not get to all of your messages in the chat, but we are so grateful for you keeping this such a vibrant space. And please, if you're in New York, stop by Peter's exhibit this weekend. I'm just going to drop the link in the chat. I'm sorry I don't have it open.
I will add to that if you're in another country, in another state, if you look up the New York Public Library, and my show is called Intersects, like insects and intersect put together, Intersects. It is, you can see art from the show. There's audio where I talk about the show, and I got all sorts of really cool entomologists, people who study insects, to talk about insects, which you can listen to there. There's downloadable art that you can color. Go to your computer, download it, color it. And there's even like a poet, Spanish poet from Mexico, Spanish-speaking poet, who reads his poem in Spanish, and I read it in English. So there's all kinds of things you can get even if you can't make it to the show.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing.
My
And some
pleasure.
folks asked where they could find more of your work. I'm also just going to drop the link to Peter's website in the chat here. And thank you so much again, Peter. It was so wonderful having you. This was so fascinating. Thanks to all of you.
Thank
we
you all
hope to
for
see you
coming.
back next week.
Excellent. And I'll see some of you on September 6th.
Yes. See you then. Good night, everybody.